Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about advancement and promotion in the reserves. I had a question about this. Now, I'll start off by saying that the advancement process for the reserves is actually very similar to active duty. There's just a couple minor differences. So I'll start off by just talking about advancement in general, and then I'll get into some of the details that separate active from reserve. So the main way that you advance on the enlisted side is by completing your enlistment packet requirements and your rating specific requirements. So these are EPME, which is your enlisted professional military education, and then RPQ, which is rating performance qualification. So in layman's terms, that just means you have a series of sign-offs that you have to complete that are related to general Coast Guard knowledge and principles. And then you have your packet that is related to your specific rating. So the general enlisted part is the same for every rank, regardless of your rating. But the rating specific is obviously rating specific. So for each rank, E2, E3, E4, E5, you have a completely different set of requirements. It's going to be contingent on your level of responsibility that's expected of you at the various rates and ranks. So once you get all those signed off, you submit it, and if you have completed everything on time, which for the reserves it's June 30th is the day to get all rank packet performance requirements in June 30th to take the service-wide in October. Now this is one of the key differences. The service-wide is the test that we take to place on the advancement list. For the reserves, we only take the service-wide once per year, and that's in October. And so the unfortunate thing is, if you don't test really well, you have to wait a whole year to take it again. On the active duty side, they take their test in May and November. So they have two chances each year. But their process of advancing is a little bit different. So I'll back up again for a second. Now, after you turn in those performance qualification packets, you then have to take an end of course test, unless it's waived, which sometimes it is. So the end of course test is an objective, specific test. They have one for your rate and one for the general Coast Guard knowledge. Again, you have to score 80% on these tests. You're not competing against any other coasties. You just have to get 80%. If you don't, you can take the test again in 3 weeks. So it's not the end of the world, but you just have to study more. There are some times where that test is waived, and that can be for a myriad of reasons, but generally it has to do with not having enough of a particular rank or rate in the Coast Guard. So if that happens, then you simply turn in your packet requirements, and if you have a recommendation for advancement on your marks, then you'll be put on the list to take the service-wide. So again, reserves, you'll take it in October. Active, you'll take it in either November or May, depending on when you turn in your packets. The service-wide, that's the test that you're competing against other coasties of the same rate and rank. So if you're competing for, MST2, you're going to be competing against every other MST3 that's also testing for MST2. Now, you will not be competing against active. They have a completely separate list. So on the reserve side, you'll rank against all the other people that took it. So let's say 50 people took it and you score number 15, then you'll be 15 on the list. One more caveat, we have this thing called multipliers. And this is where the X factors come into play that can affect how you rank on that final list. And it goes beyond simply how you test, how you score on the test. So some of the factors here are how long you've been in the service, how long you've been at your current rate, and pay grade, like how long you've been at your current rank, your marks. So having really stellar marks puts you above, puts you higher up. And then any awards you might have received. You get point values for different awards. So the higher the award, the more the point value. You can only use that advantage for one advancement cycle. So if you advance and place, like if you place a certain place on the list and you advance, you can't then use those awards again next time you test. But in a nutshell, that's how you advance. Now, I talked already about a couple of the key differences between active and reserve. Another one that's a big difference is that on the reserve side, when our advancement eligibility list comes out, which is usually late November or December, around there, that is for the next year. So the first of the month, every month, there'll be an advancement list that will come out, and it'll show you the personnel that are advancing that month. So if you score number 1 on the test, then look out in January, look for your name. Hopefully you'll make it. If not, hopefully you'll make it in February or March. But the higher up you are, or the lower rank, depending on how you look at it, the further down the list you are, the less likely you are to advance. So you kind of have to keep an eye on it every month and see where it falls. The big difference there with active is they have what's called a supplemental list. They can very accurately track and project what billets will open up and who will be retiring at a certain point in the year. And so what they do is they release a master list that is essentially going to have a cutoff point. And if you're above the cut, then you will advance that year. You don't know when you'll advance, but you know you'll make it that year. So that's another big difference between the two. Just that knowing if you're going to advance. So that's the standard way, in a nutshell, to advance. There's a couple other ways to advance on the enlisted side. We have what's called frocking, which is sort of a form of a ceremonial type of advancement, which is basically you have shown yourself to be capable and competent at a level above your current pay grade, and especially it can happen when you're filling the role of the higher pay grade. So like if you're an E6 and your shop doesn't have a chief and you've been acting chief, that's the type of thing that can come into play that might make you a consideration for a frocking. Another reason why it might happen is like if you're already on the advancement list, but you might not advance until November and they need a chief right now and it's February. So those are other ways you might get it. The other big different way of advancing, and this is a fairly new thing that's just started in the last few years, is called meritorious advancement. This is, again, kind of like frocking, but a little bit different. The district commanders, the admirals at the district level, have a certain amount. I think it's three, but I'm not 100%. Like a quota that they're allowed to meritoriously advance per fiscal year. So what happens is, for any number of reasons, a supervisor can nominate somebody that they feel exceeds the level of responsibility of their rank. Again, kind of like we talked about before with frocking, but this is a specific bucket, in a sense, that you can use to try to meritoriously advance somebody. It is only eligible for advancement to E4, E5, or E6. So it's just for petty officers. Can't use it to meritoriously advance someone to chief. But it is something that is another tool that supervisors have to try to help people advance. I have seen this happen a couple times. It's fairly difficult to get a meritorious advancement through, just because the people that have the final say on it only have a couple of times they can use that per year. So they have to be a little bit selective with it. So those are the general means of advancement on active and reserve. Now, the other part of the question I received was on promotions, which promotions relates to officers. So I'm not an officer, and I don't have as much extensive knowledge as I do on the enlisted part of that, but I can answer broadly. Basically, on the officer side, you are you're actually competing against your class that you received your commission with. This is something that I just learned a couple years ago myself. So if you went through Rocky or OCS, then you are competing against that class. If you went through the Coast Guard Academy, you're competing against that class. If you were prior enlisted and then you received a commission, you would be competing against the other people that received a commission during that same time period. It's a little strange the way they do it, but basically that's kind of how it works. And you compete against those other officers, and the number one metric that they use is the OERs. That's the officer evaluation reviews, and those are everything to officers. Those OERs, I mean, it's like a running joke in the Coast Guard, but they live and die by those OERs. They're very important, very critical to their promoting in their career. And beyond that, I don't know a lot of the details of how that process works, because I don't have any experience with that. But that is in a nutshell how it works. So it's, if you are an officer, be familiar with the OERs at your level. Like, know what they are, know what the standards are, know what they're looking for, and then proactively tailor your career, your actions, your job, your responsibilities into meeting and exceeding those standards. That's going to be your best bet for being able to promote. And then you have warrant officers. They also use OERs, but they're competing against the other warrant officers within their specialty. So that's in a nutshell the different types of advancements and promotions that exist for the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Reserve. I hope that helps a little bit. I can definitely go into more detail on a lot of the minor points, and I'm certainly happy to do that. I like to keep the videos relatively short. So let me know in the comments if you've got follow-up questions on any of these things, on how to study for tests, or what kinds of things you might be tested on, or how the practical performance factors work and things like that. Always here to help out in any way I can. Hope everyone's doing well, and talk to you soon.